Grüezi Amerika, Views from the Sister Republic, a University of St. Gallen podcast by Claudia Brühwiler. Grüezi miteinander. Welcome to a new episode of Views from the Sister Republic. Today's episode is in English. What an election. The question I hear the most from Swiss friends and acquaintances is simply, why? Why did Americans re-elect Donald J. Trump? One way to make sense of the outcome is straightforward. Check out the exit polls and you will hear a resounding echo of Bill Clinton's electoral slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." But I would suggest taking another approach. Let's go back to the night of the election and join two New Yorkers. Jamie and Billy are both writers. They currently live in Manhattan, but they are craving rural solitude for their writing. On election night, they are joined by another writer who's ready to swap house with them for a summer, and they follow their election results together. At the beginning of the evening, the couple is euphoric and excited at the prospect of a new president, the first woman in the White House. But the longer the evening, the worse their mood. The magic wall in the CNN studio shows one state after another turning red. Donald Trump is set to win all swing states. Jamie and Billy cannot retain their anger and disappointment. Understandably so. New York County overwhelmingly supports Kamala Harris. The vice president receives 82% of the votes here. The state of New York turns blue in the election night, with 55% of voters supporting Harris. While Jamie and Billy air their frustration, their guest remains silent. Later, he would observe that, for all their sharpness and articulateness and savoir-faire, they had no idea who the great mass of Americans were, nor had they seen so clearly before that it was not those educated like themselves who would determine the country's fate, but the scores of millions unlike them and unknown to them who had given Trump a second chance, in Billy's words, to wreck a very great thing. Those educated like themselves would later comment on MSNBC, CNN, in the New York Times and elsewhere how this election had not been decided by a gender gap, but by an education gap. Professors at elite institutions like Harvard canceled class on the day after the election so that students could mourn what could have been and process what happened. Georgetown even offered soothing activities to their students, such as coloring mandalas and playing with Legos. To them, Jamie's and Billy's guest would have liked to say, "I thought to say it's bad, but not like waking up the morning after Pearl Harbor was bombed. It's bad, but not like waking up the morning after Kennedy was shot. It's bad, but not like waking up the morning after Martin Luther King was shot. I thought to say, we all have been through it." And he's right. Defeat is part of the democratic process. Accepting the outcome of elections is not only what the defeated candidates have to learn, but citizens as well. The guest is spot on in his observations, even though they are fiction and in response to the election of 24. Yes, the guest is called Nathan Zuckerman, and he is the alter ego of one of America's greatest writers, Philipp Roth. Exit Ghost was the last novel in which Zuckerman appeared. When he joined Jamie and Billy in their Manhattan home, it was not to watch the second triumph of Donald Trump, but the re-election of George W. Bush. The scores of millions unlike them and unknown to them let Bush remain in power, to the despair of people like Jamie and Billy. So yes, you can make sense of the election outcome by studying exit polls, reading every critical article out there and listen to hours of discussions. Or you can take a huge step back and dive into books that not have been written for the current moment, but that tell you so much more about it than any newspaper piece will. My podcast has 3 book recommendations of this kind. And yes, I have a tendency to say that reading Roth means reading America, but I do hope you will agree after finishing Exit Ghost. The German translation has been published under the same title, by the way. If you don't like reading novels, I have two other recommendations for you: a political biography and a graphic novel. Whenever we look at the present moment, we would like to find parallels to the past that might help us understand what is going on. And in this case, we would like to understand the type of man and politician Donald Trump represents. Sure, you can read The Art of the Deal and all the insider stories of his past administration. But it might be more instructive to acquaint yourself with the, quote, most influential loser of 20th century American politics, Governor George Wallace. Wallace served 3 times as the governor of Alabama, from 1963 to 1967, from 1971 to 1979, and from 1983 to 1987. As he was not allowed to run for re-election after his first term, he made his wife the candidate, and he served as first husband. That alone will tell you a lot about his character and persona. George Wallace ate, drank, slept politics. But at the same time, he was remarkably unideological. He launched his career on stark opposition to integration in the South. At his first inauguration in 1963, he proclaimed, quote, segregation now, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever. He made the lives of civil rights activists hell in Alabama, and that's an understatement. But he seemed a changed man in the later stages of his career, a man who embraced integration and distanced himself from the racist flames he once had fanned. Not everyone bought his redemption story, though. Dan T. Carter's book, The Politics of Rage, takes you through this remarkable career. At the same time, you will learn a lot about politics in the Jim Crow South, with its shady backroom deals and proximity to white supremacists. By following Wallace's political trajectory, you will also get insight into a pivotal moment in U.S. political history. When Wallace started as a page boy in Birmingham, the capital, the Democratic Party ruled the South. But that changed when Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964. And while Johnson found ways to rein in Wallace, no one could prevent Wallace from running for president in 1968. He would become the last third-party or independent candidate to win any electoral votes, as he carried 5 southern states: Alabama, Arkansas, Georgia, Louisiana, and Mississippi. To quote Dan Carter, the genius of George Wallace lay in his ability to link traditional conservatism to an earthy language that voiced powerful cultural beliefs and symbols with a much broader appeal to millions of Americans. Sounds familiar? Well, I think you will find much in Wallace's biography that will remind you of the former and incoming president. Both men have an undeniably great political instinct. Now to my final recommendation. Many speculate about Trump's immigration policy and what his administration will actually do against undocumented migrants. We often hear how dystopian the idea of internment camps sounds, but sometimes dystopia lies in the past. While traveling through Wyoming this summer, we revisited a chapter of America's past that is hardly talked about. Close to the busy tourist town Cody, which was once founded by the legendary Buffalo Bill, you will find Hart Mountain. Between 1942 and 1945, Hart Mountain was the 3rd largest town of the state of Wyoming. However, its residents were held there against their will. Hart Mountain was one of 10 so-called relocation camps that were actually internment camps for Japanese Americans. Based on an executive order by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, over 120,000 Japanese Americans from the West Coast were transferred to such camps. irrespective of their citizenship and loyalty to the United States. They were only released when the Supreme Court decided in 1944 that loyal US citizens could not be detained for no reason. Actor George Takei spent part of his childhood in such an internment camp in Arkansas. He takes us inside the camp in his graphic memoir, They Called Us Enemy, which is also available in German. They Called Us Enemy, eine Kindheit im Internierungslager. Sometimes you don't have to imagine dystopia. It's right there in our past. So, these were my 3 reading recommendations. If the list is too gloomy for your Christmas reading tastes, there's also an American classic to close with. Dr. Seuss will tell you how the Grinch stole Christmas. Thank you for joining me today. Auf Wiederhören. Grüezi Amerika. Views from the Sister Republic, a University of St. Gallen podcast by Claudia Brühwiler.